Hello, this is Shaka Extra Time. A very warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Today we are talking about a wide range of issues, but I think we'll start in Asia, where the U.S. president has traveled to Vietnam to meet the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Your thoughts?
It's very interesting. First of all, when you talk about Vietnam, those of us who were around at that time, you know that in the 1970s, the United States was at war with Vietnam. They fought for so many years, and that war caused a lot of problems in both nations, really. And to see that you have the President of the United States and the man in charge of North Korea actually meeting in, is it Hanoi?
Yes.
It is incredible because, first of all, the two meetings, this is the second time that the heads of those two nations have actually met in a historic summit or historic meeting since the war of 1950 to 53.
What's at stake? Why is it so important that the two leaders have to meet?
We're talking about nuclear weapons here, my friend. You know, North Korea may be a very small country. It may not be industrialized and what have you, but it does have the big weapon, a weapon that can threaten, a weapon that can be used to destabilize essentially stability and peace of the region and even beyond, because in fact there are some studies which suggest that it could very well have the capacity to shoot, for example, or to send a bomb to mainland United States of America.
Some of Trump's critics have said that, for example, when he met with Kim Jong-un the first time, he had no concrete ideas or concrete plan that came out of that summit. They are predicting something similar along the lines of not coming out with something concrete. What do you say about that kind of analysis at this point?
I have seen that, and let's hope that those are probably pessimists, really, because let's face it, first of all, the very fact that that meeting could actually happen, I think, is a very huge deal, because there is the possibility that at the end of the day, even though no previous U.S. president has actually met the head of, you know, North Korea and what have you, despite the fact that this is a state that has been treated as a rogue state, but really which is very potentially dangerous because it has the big weapon. It could destabilize the region. It could cause a lot of problems. And so no matter what people think about President Donald Trump, at least this time around, really, he needs to be supported in the fact that he is talking. And talking with that young man could bring about some kind of understanding, and therefore there might not really be war. And could also be an opportunity, by the way, to end the war between North Korea, the United States, and its allies since 1953. North Korea also suffers from sanctions from the United States and the U.S. Allies and what have you, and therefore that also hampers it in terms of economic development and, you know, what have you, in terms of improving the quality of life of its own people. They don't have as much food as they probably should have and what have you. And so there could be, in fact, a sort of quid pro quo. North Korea could adopt this denuclearization, you know, so that people don't worry about the potential threats and you name it and what have you. And then North Korea also could benefit out of the possibility that the United States and its allies could actually drop or remove sanctions.
How about people who said that perhaps these sanctions are just a propaganda tool? North Korea has thrived regardless of the sanctions. At the end of the day, they have been able to come up with these nuclear weapons that are scaring the hell out of a lot of people.
That's true too, but I don't think the last time I checked that their people really are having adequate food, for example. You need to have your people eat, and you need your people to feel good, to feel like they are breathing air and they are part of this planet Earth. The last time I checked, when you look at the reports, most of the reports that come from North Korea, and indeed when you look at the statistics really that are put out, for example, by a very major and important international institution, the United Nations, when you look at the UN, for example, Development Index and what have you, North Korea doesn't fare very well at all.
Speaking about food, people need to eat. Let's cross over to Venezuela. There is another crisis there. It's been going on for a couple months now. It seems to be exacerbated by the fact that the U.S. has taken sides, is supporting opposition leader Juan Guaido, and the incumbent president Nicolas Maduro is saying that, you know what, I don't like this intervention. I want Venezuelans to take care of Venezuela and we'll solve our own problems. Your take?
Well, it's a very, very, very controversial situation, really. First of all, let's face it, you mentioned the fact that there is an absence of food for the people in Venezuela, and that is true when you look at television, you know, coverage and radio and newspapers and what have you. That is very true. It is very unfortunate because, let's face it, Paul, you're talking about Venezuela, a country that sits, by the way, on the largest deposits of oil. It shouldn't be like that. Everybody should be very rich. Everybody should have not, you know, at least 3 meals a day guaranteed. Everybody should be strong. Everybody should be living very well, going to school and, you know, essentially living their dreams, really. But it is very unfortunate that that's not very happening, and part of the reason, of course, is also the fact there is, of course, what they would call international interference. But in this particular case, you know, the United States intervening in Venezuela on behalf of democracy and on behalf of the people, I think it is something that should be applauded, except that it may seem to be, you know, sort of not really from the deepest, better part of the American heart and soul. It may seem to be selective, because it is true that there were questionable election results in Caracas. But Paul, you know as well as I do that there have been so many questionable election results around the world.
And in particular,
where you and I, in fact, come from.
Yeah.
I know that in 2016, I had been in Uganda, as a matter of fact, not only to cover the elections or the selection, as some people would say, but also to participate in what was supposed to be a presidential debate, which obviously ended up being a total sham, so to speak. I remember that the man who, at least according to the Ugandan Electoral Commission, a colonel, doctor, she's a Besigye, retired but certainly not tired. I remember him demanding for what he characterized as an electoral audit. I did not hear a single voice out of any American institution supporting that man's probably legitimate, really, demand, because there are a lot of reports suggesting that that election was a selection. And there are so many other elections that have occurred in places like, for example, the Republic of Rwanda, elections in a place like
where a person wins
Cameroon.
with 100%.
That is true, but of course there are people who say that an election in Rwanda is really like the moral equivalent of a political military operation.
Interesting. Going back to the selection thing, we talked about the politics of selection. You pick and choose who you want to support. You gave an example of Uganda. In Uganda, after the 2016 elections, people are calling for intervention. Not a single, even a U.S. ambassador or anybody issued a statement. In Kenya, you had Raila Odinga calling for a similar thing. Nothing happened. Why is it that, is it about oil, the politics of oil, the U.S. choosing which side to pick and maybe to help in terms of support for the opposition? Because you have so many opposition leaders on the continent who would like this kind of support or this kind of intervention from the U.S.
There are so many reasons, of course. You know as well as I do that when it comes to politics, countries have their own interests. It comes to politics, there are no permanent allies, no permanent adversaries. They are merely permanent interests. And so countries look out for their interests. In this particular case, we're talking about a country like Venezuela, which is sitting on the largest known oil deposits on this planet Earth. And is not very far from mainland United States of America.
And the biggest exporter of oil to the United States.
That is true. So the thing is, there must be certain interests, but I wish really that those interests would actually be reflecting the concerns of the vast majority of the people of Venezuela. And indeed, given that the United States is the only superpower as we live, it should, one would have thought that should have a moral obligation, and in which case the fact that it has benefited enormously out of its belief in exercising democracy, a government that is open, a government that is supposed to be catering for people and what have you, we hope that, well, one would hope that the United States would in fact go out of its way to promote democracy so that people at the end of the day can be the beneficiary of social, economic, political justice.
But from what you're saying, there is no democracy being promoted here. It all looks like it's the politics of oil. The United States is going to help just precisely to get those oil reserves.
Yes, but there is a democracy when it comes to the United States of America. The elections are elections. In fact, you just had an election which was won by a congressman in North Carolina, won by a Republican, which has actually been annulled because it was found to be questionable. So there is a democracy here. There are three branches of government in this country. You have the judiciary, which is headed by a chief justice, and the judiciary is independent. You have the Congress, which is shared by the Republicans controlling the Senate and the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives. Those two houses are independent of the executive, which is the White House. You can't argue with that, can you?
Well, I'll leave that for another day.
You have an independent media, whether you like it or not.
I'll leave that for another day. That's, of course, that's a relevant question as we speak. Let's move on. Let's go to a quicker comment here. Since you talked about Uganda, somebody wants you to answer. Let's go to Leila Lee. As why do you hate Museveni? Shaka?
Well, first of all, I think that Leila is really being very, very unfair. If I knew where she was, or if I had the opportunity or the honor of meeting Leila, I would ask her to come up with evidence that suggests or support her contention that I, Shaka, a kid from Kavari, hates Museveni, a man from Ntungamo. First of all, as I grew up, I used to like a man that was talking, you know, things that reflected social, economic, political justice. And that was a man called Yoweri Museveni. I admired that man. As a matter of fact, I admire the Museveni that seized the power with AK-47 in the capital of Uganda, in Kampala, in 1986, and actually governed that country up to 1996, I have no problems identifying with that Yoweri Museveni. That Yoweri Museveni, I looked at him and regarded him as my big brother. And I think it was very legitimate that he should be my big brother because we seem to be on the same page in terms of at least what he actually said. The problem is what happens after 1996 up to date. It is a sort of different Yoweri Museveni. As a matter of fact, there are people who have suggested, and they are probably right, that in fact, if the Museveni of up to 1996 met the Yoweri Museveni of the post-1996, those two Musevenis, in fact, would have a lot of problems. One would probably actually go very, very near where he could have unfettered access to an AK-47 so that they could, in fact, somehow sort out some of these contradictions that those two Musevenis reflect and symbolize. So I don't think that there is a reason, frankly, for me personally to hate Museveni.
Do you hate the personality of Museveni?
No, I do not. I mean, maybe if, in fact, I was in a situation where I was affected by Museveni so much, and in some ways I think I am, I would probably say that I dislike some of his policies. I could even perhaps go to the extent, in fact, of hating some of those policies, if in fact at the end of the day they are undemocratic. I don't like the fact, and I don't think there are so many people, frankly, who like the fact, for example, that Yoweri Museveni changed the constitution in 2005 by amending articles which removed term limits. Mind you, this is really very serious because, let's face it, that was a constitution which was, in fact, his own brainchild. When he came into power, they decided, in fact, to amend, not to amend, but to come up with a new political dispensation. They had actually an excellent document of a constitution which did not have term limits. It was open. It was a parliamentary system that eventually evolved into a sort of hybrid, where you have parliamentary system, which normally, you know, is that whichever party that wins appoints a prime minister. You can even decide, like in the case of South Africa, to call that the person who heads that particular institution a president. But this is a man who said that was not a good constitution, and he probably was right. And they changed that constitution, replaced it with another new constitution, so to speak. And that was after, by the way, so many months when very learned people sat under a commission, supposedly collecting views from Ugandans and what have you, so that at the end of the day, they gave the impression that Ugandans, for the first time, were actually going to be governed or ruled by people who were fair.
Yeah. Let's go to a quick comment from David Genza. In your opinion, Shaka, do you think Museveni is taking Uganda ahead in terms of development or declining?
You know, I honestly, first of all, I think that is a question that should be put to Ugandans themselves, and Ugandans themselves should be able to answer it. And I'm sure that if you read some of the newspapers, or you basically consume news that come out of Uganda, if you read it very, very carefully, if you look at it in a manner that you have some values or at least some standards of critical analysis, you'll find that a lot of Ugandans really do not feel good about what is happening in their country.
Let's move on. Let's go to West Africa now. Let's go to Arafat. What can African countries do to have democratic and peaceful transfers of power, especially in light of the elections? We are still waiting for the outcome of those elections in Nigeria and Senegal?
First of all, you need to have a situation where you do have an environment that allows the important thing that is called choice. People need to have at least the ability, the confidence that in fact they can choose people who are eventually going to be their leaders. In other words, an election should be an election, not a selection. It should be an election which is controlled by an electoral commission that is independent, that is free, not basically subordinate to a government of the day or subordinate to the chief executive, which is headed by a president or which is headed by a prime minister. It should be an election commission that is answerable to the people of its particular country. And therefore, at the end of the day, that electoral commission should be able to come up with results which reflect the will of the people who actually went and cast their votes, not the will of the individual eventually who announces the results or reflects the individuals who actually count the vote. That's part of the problem on the African continent. I don't think we can have more than 15 countries, sincerely, where you actually have genuine elections. You have situations where most of the countries on the continent, most of those, you have a situation which favors the incumbent. The incumbent government conducts an election, competes against people whose hands are tied behind their backs and their legs are tied together, and they are expected, when they are punched, to punch back. How can you do that?
Are you suggesting that most of the elections that take place, for example, the election that just took place in Nigeria or Senegal, you're looking at a Stalin kind of where it doesn't matter who shows up to vote, but what matters is who counts the vote? Because you have so many complaints from Nigeria. People are saying that this election could be rigged. Not so much in Senegal, but at least in Nigeria, people are worried.
As a matter of fact, this time around, even in Senegal, there are problems because there are certain candidates, including the former popular mayor of Dakar, who was expected, at least by his supporters, to be a formidable candidate who could probably even make it, in fact, to State House in Dakar. He has not had the opportunity to stand. But when it comes to Nigeria, it's very unfortunate because, let's face it, you're talking about the most populous nation on the African continent. You're also talking about a country that is so blessed. It is the largest oil exporter out of Africa.
Another Venezuela of sorts.
Another Venezuela of sorts in the context of Africa. This country has some of the most educated, some of the smartest minds on this planet Earth, not just Africa, on planet Earth. If you talk about Hollywood, we just went through the rituals of the Oscars and what have you. You have Nollywood. When it comes to movies, it comes to music, entertainment, and what have you. You talk about Nigeria. You talk about the land of the Oga Pata Pata. When you go to Lagos, you can't imagine what's going on there because it's very difficult for you to negotiate the infrastructure. So the thing is, Nigeria, for example, it has spent out of more than 60 years of independence, because the last time I checked, I think it got actual independence in 1960. Most of the time during that period, it has actually been ruled by soldiers through military coups. There was a very unfortunate civil war that gave the birth of Biafra. She lived very, temporarily. Now, when you look at the elections in Nigeria, each time you have an election, it is not really a celebration. it's just an opportunity for mourning because people actually get killed. And as we talk, even in this particular election, even though there are fewer people, according to reports, that have actually lost their lives,
right,
you still have had at least 47 people who have actually been killed since Saturday. And that is actually the day when the Nigerians went to the polls. And since October last year, Paul, when campaigns actually started, there are more than 250, they are actually in the neighborhood of 260, who have actually been killed. Just as a result, really, of being given supposedly the opportunity to exercise their democratic choice. We don't need those types of elections.
How about critics, for example, who said that when it comes to criticism, yes, they deserve the criticism, but there are others who argue that some of these electoral commissions are under pressure and they perform very well under pressure. Again, in the context of Nigeria, they delivered a peaceful election. There were no reports. You didn't see soldiers beating up people like in some other elections we've seen before. At least people were able to line up and vote. How do you respond to that kind of criticism?
No, you are right, Paul. Yeah. But I think that, again, Nigeria, when you talk about Nigeria, you're not talking about a simple country. You're not talking about a simple situation here. You're talking about Africa. The more than 1 billion people living in the African continent, correct?
Yes.
And can you believe that 1 out of perhaps every 4 Africans may in fact be a Nigerian? So wherever Nigeria goes, it is assumed that Africa will go. So it owes, I think, Africa the honor, the duty of showing successful examples. Because if Nigeria can get it in West Africa, then in fact, most West African countries could follow, just like they did 4 years ago. You had this professor, Atahiri Jega, who pulled off like a miracle.
No. Very quickly, respond to this from Vicky Daniel. If he says 90% of Nigerians voted for, they don't want the president. So how come he's winning the election?
First of all,
this is based on him, not me.
Yeah, but you see, Vicky will probably, he can say that, and is it he or she?
I think it's a he. Vicky Daniel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vicky Daniel. I don't know. When it comes to French, it could actually not be a he.
Okay.
You see, again, where does that Vicky get that kind of information that is being pitched here? You have to have the evidence. You really have to. I don't think at his or her level, at that person, the individual's level, I don't know that he has the evidence. If he was having the evidence, he would have to be citing it, attributing it.
Very briefly, talk about what you're talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa.
In fact, tomorrow we are going to look at the elections in Nigeria and Senegal, looking at the results and the implications of whoever wins and all that kind of stuff. So we really hope that, the people of those 2 countries, at the end of the day, will get the results that they deserve, meaning the results that in fact reflect the will of the people, not the will of the individuals who manage the electoral commissions. And because you see the problem
Shaka, we have to wrap. Unfortunately, we have to wrap. Yeah.
Are appointed by incumbent presidents.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.